it would be the 8th of May, 2015, was the 70th anniversary of the end of the war. And there are still, as far as I know, only four of us left from my battalion, the service battery of the 670th Field Artillery Battalion. There are four of us still living, and so I had the pleasure on the 8th of May last week to call the other three and talk about where were you 70 years ago today. Well, they didn't have to hesitate to tell me where they were. They knew exactly where they were 70 years ago today. Well, in World War II, throughout the United States, we all pulled together, and everybody wanted this war to end, and to end favorably. And the only way it was going to end favorably is if we all pitched in and helped. So for a young man like me, who just turned 18, volunteering to go in the Army was, we all felt, or let's say we all, the majority of us felt that was the thing to do. And so when it was time to go and I could go, I was ready. We went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which was a field artillery replacement training center. And we were there for 17 weeks of training. And it was, I can't say it was fun, but it was a workout. And we learned a lot in those 17 weeks. And after the training was over, then they assigned us to what they call line outfits, to different battalions. And it had been, the War Department had come up with the idea that right after, this was after the D-Day invasion, that right after the D-Day invasion you would need 100 field artillery battalions to go in there and help to clean up after the invasion. And I went into one of those battalions that was formed to go over and finish the war. Anyway, we got on the train and went right down to the harbor, right to the waterfront, got off the train and walked about 100 feet onto the boat. And got on the boat. Now this was in towards the end of January of 1945. And we spent a night in the harbor, and actually we took off during the night sometime, and the next morning woke up, got up on deck, and we were out at sea, and as far as the eye could see in both directions were other ships. There were 40 ships in our convoy, and the North Atlantic, we headed across the North Atlantic. It was cold and it was a bit rough. It was not a pleasant journey. We were on it for 14 days. We were on this ship, and we did have drills constantly for submarine attacks, because there were submarines were very active then. As a matter of fact, while we were on the James Parker in our 14 days, the Allies sank 8 German submarines, and so they were still active. And we went for 4 or 5 days and drills, maybe 2 a day, and put everything on, get your life jacket on, get up on deck and stand there and wait, and then finally we were dismissed. We got notice one day that from now on there will be no drills. If that horn sounds, it's the real thing. Well, about 1 o'clock in the morning the horn went off, and of course we all got out on deck, and that was one of the scariest moments. We stood there and it was pitch dark, and you couldn't have a light of any kind, no lights, and you couldn't see anything, and we were there for, I think, probably about 2 hours. And in the meantime, our ship had dropped a depth charge, so apparently there was a submarine in the area that was the cause of all this alert. It was nervousness, anxiety. To say I was scared is a masterpiece of understatement. Not exactly anxious to get into battle, but we were a little bit scared of what lay ahead of us. We had none of us really had any idea what we're getting into. And we got off the ship and went to what they call Camp Lucky Strike. It was a large camp that we stayed there for a few days, slept in tents, and then they found a chateau for us in Normandy, And we were in there for a while waiting for our equipment to show up. And so when we got our tractors and our howitzers and our trucks and our equipment together, then we received orders to move into where the front lines were at the time. And for us, that was on the banks of the Rhine River. And that's where we set up, and we shelled into Duisburg, Germany for probably close to a week. And we were credited with knocking out a couple of anti-aircraft batteries, and we destroyed a large German railroad gun. I come from an Amish family. The Amish people speak Pennsylvania Dutch, which is a Germanic dialect. When we got into combat, into Germany, the battery commander said, understand you speak German. And I said, yeah, I do a little bit. I speak a Germanic dialect. Well, from then on, I was the interpreter, and I learned German. The rest of what I didn't know, I learned fast. But Pennsylvania Dutch was my first language, and it did help me, and I was the only one in the battery that could speak it. I was in the service battery, and we delivered the ammunition to the howitzers, and I was an ammunition handler. And it was really somewhat exciting to be able to have a night ammunition run. We had to run without lights on our trucks. We had the little cat eyes we used so we could see the other trucks. But it was a little bit scary, and we got to the positions to deliver our ammunition, and I looked down the bank. We were up on a high hill above the Rhine River, and I couldn't see the river for a while, and finally the clouds cleared a little bit, and I could see this wide expanse of river down below, and that was my first glance at the Rhine River. But all the while this was going on, there were tracers being fired across the river, both on the other side and back to our side. Ammunition we were shooting across the river all the time. And of course there was constant noise. The heavy guns would fire first way off in the background, and then the medium, then the light ones would come overhead, and you could hear these shells whistle overhead. And then you could hear them as they landed on the other side of the river. And for a 18-year-old farm boy, it was exciting and scary. An ammunition handler, the projectiles that we used, the shells you might call them, in these howitzers weighed 95 pounds. And so, then we had a powder charge that it weighed much less. So we would load the ammunition into the barrel in the breech of the gun, the back part of the howitzer, and ram it home and secure it, and then they put the powder charge in, close the breech block, and then fired when we were given the command to fire. But handling 95-pound shells, or 95-pound projectiles, I was a little bit short, and I was a little bit small. I weighed 120 pounds when I went in the Army, and I did weigh more than that by the time I got out of basic, but handling all of those 95-pound projectiles for quite a period of time, it was a task in itself. They did value my ability to speak German, and there were times when it was annoying to be that way, and there were times when I was kind of grateful, because there were times we had somewhat dangerous missions to deliver ammunition, and they wouldn't let me go because they didn't want me to go out and get hurt. So I guess it was kind of special in a way. I look at my role in it was such an insignificant little thing that while I am proud of it, it wasn't, my role was not that much. It was a very small cog in the gears. It was not very, but I certainly feel proud of the fact that we as a country did what we did. There are things, of course, that I saw that I don't particularly care to remember about. Seeing dead bodies, seeing dead Germans was bad. Seeing dead Americans was a lot worse. As far as the smells of war, the one thing that comes back to me is when the Ruhr pocket surrendered, there were, I believe, around 100,000 prisoners of war taken, and we put them all in one place, and I was helping to haul them in there as they were captured. and putting them into this camp, and it was a warm day, and these German soldiers had been in combat for who knows how long, and the body odor of 100,000 men on a warm day in a valley with no wind, I can still smell it. There were so many hard parts, it's really hard to say what was the hardest part of it. Not getting any sleep, not having a decent place to sleep. A lot of times we slept in the back of the 2.5-ton trucks that were loaded with projectiles, so laying on a pile of 95-pound projectiles and sleeping wasn't fun. And I don't know, there were a lot of things that were hard about it, and of course not having a hot meal, eating sea rations. Wound up eventually in Heidmühl, Germany, and this is when things started slowing down. Heidmühl was a small town in the corner of Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia where the borders meet. Howitzers had been silent for a day or so, and everybody thought might be the war was over, but we weren't sure. Nobody knew for sure, since we hadn't fired the howitzers for a little while. And we got a word that we should be at this theater in this small town and by 2 p.m. So we got over there, and we got there, the Signal Corps had set up a radio and loudspeakers on the stage. And through the crackling static came the voice, the unmistakable voice of Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, informing us that indeed the war in Europe was over. So that was VE Day, May the 8th, 1945. A day etched in my memory forever. My immediate thoughts were disbelief. I presume that the rest of them had similar thoughts, because there were quite a number of us there from other outfits other than my own, and nobody said a word. Everybody was dead silent, and we walked out of there and went back to our railroad station where we were living at the time, and it was several days before we got to even talk about it. And my thoughts were, this is a trap, and Hitler's promise of these super weapons that he had hidden down in that part of the country, they were going to zap us in a day or two. And that were my thoughts. In the rear echelon, it was great jubilation. In the frontline troops, it was met with silence. And I've never really completely explained it, but it was a strange feeling. Sort of like a sacred moment on the one hand and disbelief on the other. The reason I keep it is to remind me of what kind of a dictatorship regime the Third Reich was. The swastika, it's kind of outlawed in a lot of places right now, but to me it's a reminder of things that were and that we corrected, and things that could possibly happen again. So it's a reminder of tyranny. Read the history, read what we went through, read what the Depression was, talk to people that remember it, and you will learn things from it. And if you learn from history, you won't be doomed to repeat it. Looking back, to me, it was an absolute necessity that we did what we did.